What if suffering is not a mistake of existence, but its very essence? What if the very thing we try to avoid is, paradoxically, the key to a more serene life? We live in a time when happiness is treated as an obligation. On social media, we are bombarded with images of achievements, trips, smiles, and a constant idea that being well all the time is a sign of success. But the real experience of life is different. Between one moment of pleasure and the next, we find restlessness, frustration, and often an emptiness that we don't know how to name. It was precisely this discomfort, with the promise of unattainable happiness, that led philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer to propose a radically different perspective. For him, human life is trapped between two poles: desire, which is never satisfied, and boredom, which arises as soon as desire is satisfied. It is a cycle that repeats itself endlessly, and the more we try to escape it, the more trapped we become. But Schopenhauer does not invite us to despair. On the contrary, he offers a possibility of liberation that arises from acceptance, a path where, instead of resisting pain, we understand it as a natural part of existence. And it is in this paradox that the key to this video lies. Today, we'll explore how this philosophical view can transform the way we approach life, suffering, and our expectations. If this resonates with you, be sure to subscribe to the channel to continue receiving thought-provoking and perhaps liberating reflections. After all, to understand Schopenhauer, we must begin by understanding the man behind his thought. Who was he? And why did he see the world with such lucidity and disenchantment? Arthur Schopenhauer was born in 1788 in the city of Danzig, now Gdansk, Poland. He grew up in the comfort of a bourgeois family, with access to an elite education and an international background. His father, a prosperous and cultured merchant, wanted his son to become a businessman. But young, Arthur soon showed that his calling lay elsewhere, to delve into the questions that most people would rather avoid, about suffering, the meaning of life, and the nature of reality. As a young man, Schopenhauer experienced a series of losses and disappointments. The early death of his father, the estrangement of his mother, and a series of unstable social relationships marked his youth. All of this contributed to shaping his critical and often bitter view of the human condition. But instead of succumbing to nihilism, he channeled this view into a profound, original, and disturbingly lucid philosophical construction. Inspired by Kant, who had revolutionized modern philosophy, Schopenhauer went beyond reason and morality. He looked at what was behind everything, at the invisible force that moves the world, and that is where he found what he called will. For him, it is not reason that controls life, but a blind, irrational impulse that is present in everything, from nature to human beings. This will is insatiable, always wanting more, never satisfied, and it is this will that condemns us to an existence marked by frustration and repetition. If many thinkers before him sought to build optimistic systems, proposing moral orders or superior reasons to justify existence, Schopenhauer went in the opposite direction. He exposed life as it is, naked, raw, unadorned. His direct, often scathing style earned him criticism and isolation. For a long time, his philosophy was ignored. But as the years went by, it began to attract more and more readers who identified with its brutal sincerity. Schopenhauer's disenchantment is not a denial of beauty or the depth of life. On the contrary, he saw beauty, but a melancholy, fleeting beauty that reveals itself only to those who are not numbed by the illusions of the world. His philosophy is a call to lucidity. He does not want you to conform, but to see clearly. Understanding who Schopenhauer was is essential to understanding why. His thinking was so radical and so necessary. Now that we know the thinker, we can delve deeper into the heart of his philosophy, the will as the root of all suffering. A concept that seems abstract at first glance, but that when understood, reveals a lot about the way we live and suffer. Blind will and the cycle of suffering. Imagine an invisible force that permeates everything, nature, animals, human beings, and that moves us relentlessly, even when we believe we are acting of our own free will. For Schopenhauer, this force has a name, will, and it is not rational, has no moral purpose, no ultimate goal. It simply desires incessantly. Will, according to him, is the essence of reality. Everything that exists is a manifestation of this blind force, which expresses itself in us as desire. But this desire, no matter how much it is momentarily satisfied, is never completely fulfilled. As soon as we get what we want, a new desire arises. And until we get it, we suffer. The result is an endless cycle. Wanting, achieving, getting tired, wanting again. It's easy to see this in everyday life. Think about the last time you really wanted something. A new cell phone, a job, a relationship. When you finally got it, how long did the satisfaction last? Soon came the desire for something new, maybe bigger, maybe more difficult, maybe more meaningful. This doesn't happen by chance, it's the will at work. And what happens when, for a moment, we don't desire anything? When everything seems in order, then boredom sets in, the uncomfortable silence of goallessness. And then, to escape it, we throw ourselves back into desire. That's why Schopenhauer said that life oscillates like a pendulum between the pain of lack and the emptiness of boredom. This diagnosis may seem grim at first glance, but if you've ever felt this cycle in your own life, you know there's truth to it. The philosopher didn't describe it as a personal punishment, but as a universal condition. We're all subject to this movement, and that's precisely where the transformative power of his philosophy begins. By recognizing this pattern, we can begin to question it, and perhaps free ourselves from it. In Schopenhauer's view, we are not masters of our desires. On the contrary, we are carried along by them. Even when we believe we are acting freely, it is the will that moves us, like an undercurrent that never ceases. And the more we ignore this, the more enslaved we become by this energy. Perhaps this is why so many people today feel exhausted, even though they live in a world full of options and comfort. The constant promise of immediate pleasure, which never lasts, creates a silent anxiety. We chase experiences, possessions, social validation, but nothing seems to be enough. And the strangest thing is, we feel guilty about this, as if it were our problem alone. But what if it isn't? What if this feeling is actually a reflection of the structure of existence? What if stopping to observe this pattern is the first step to breaking out of it? If this content is making you think, don't forget to like the video. It helps us continue to bring you deep reflections in an accessible way, and it also shows the algorithm that there is value in this type of thinking. By understanding how will works in our lives, we begin to see our desires in a different light, and most importantly, we stop blaming ourselves for never feeling fully satisfied. The truth is that total satisfaction is not on the horizon, but perhaps peace lies somewhere else. This is where Schopenhauer surprises us. Even after describing this cycle of suffering, he points to a direction. It is not about eliminating desire, which would be impossible, but about understanding its role and finding ways to break its hold on us. How? The answer lies in the next step of his philosophy, the paradox of pessimism. The paradox of pessimism, accepting to be free. So far, we've seen how Schopenhauer describes existence as a prison of desires, and how the will drags us into an endless cycle between wanting and boredom. At this point, the inevitable question arises: if life is doomed to this pattern, is there any hope? This is where what we call the paradox of pessimism comes in. Schopenhauerian pessimism is not an invitation to give up or despair. It is, in fact, a rare kind of lucidity. By recognizing that life is not meant to satisfy our deepest desires, Schopenhauer proposes something that sounds counterintuitive but transformative: acceptance as a form of freedom. In most cultural and philosophical traditions, we are taught to fight against suffering. We seek to overcome it with willpower, with positivity, with effort. Suffering is seen as an obstacle, something that must be overcome. But Schopenhauer turns this path on its head. He invites us to look at suffering head-on, not as something to be overcome, but as something to be understood and even embraced. This acceptance is not apathetic resignation. It is a kind of active awareness. When we stop fighting the nature of existence, we begin to conserve enormous amounts of psychic energy. Instead of endlessly searching for meaning or fulfillment that never comes, we learn to be with life as it is, imperfect, incomplete, but real. Schopenhauer found echoes of this thought in Buddhism, which he deeply admired. The idea that suffering arises from desire is a point of convergence between his ideas and the Buddhist Four Noble Truths. Just as Buddha taught the path of detachment and the cessation of desire, Schopenhauer pointed to the same core. We must let go of the rope that hangs us. The paradox lies precisely there. By accepting that life will not bring complete satisfaction, we free ourselves from the constant frustration of waiting for it to do so. And this generates, in a curious way, a kind of relief, a silent calm, like someone who stops chasing mirages and finally sits in the shade of a tree, tired but at peace. This doesn't mean giving up on dreams or ambitions. It means changing where those dreams come from. Instead of wanting something to fill a void, we start to walk more lightly, knowing that the void is part of the landscape. It's like walking with a stone in your shoe. Instead of pretending it doesn't exist or running to distract yourself from the pain, we stop, take off our shoe, look inside, and learn to walk differently. There is also an ethical liberation in this thought. If everyone is, to a greater or lesser degree, subject to the same will, then everyone suffers. This perception brings us closer to others and can awaken a deeper compassion. We are not in a race, but on a common journey. This solidarity in suffering is, for Schopenhauer, one of the few possible lights. At its core, the paradox of pessimism is a shift in perspective. Instead of asking, "How can I be happy?" the question becomes, "How can I live with clarity in a world that is not designed to satisfy me?" The answer is not simple, but it begins with an honest recognition of the human condition. And this is where Schopenhauer's philosophy begins to point the way. If the will is always moving us, how can we escape its dominion, even for brief moments? Are there refuges where the will loses strength and where suffering gives way to contemplation? His answer is yes. And these refuges are closer than you might think, in art, in compassion, and in a way of living that refuses to feed the gears of desire. These are the paths we will explore next as antidotes to the cycle of suffering. How to escape desire: art, compassion, and contemplation. Faced with a world driven by an insatiable will, Schopenhauer does not leave us without direction. On the contrary, he indicates three main ways to free ourselves, even temporarily, from the tyranny of desire. These moments of relief are rare, but profoundly transformative. And it is in them that we find the true value of Schopenhauerian philosophy, not only pointing out the problem, but suggesting ways forward. The first of these is art. For Schopenhauer, aesthetic experience is one of the few occasions in which we are able to suspend the dominion of the will. When we contemplate a work of art, a painting, a sculpture, or above all, a piece of music, we are overcome by a pure perception of the object. In that instant, we leave aside our personal desires, our interests, even our identity for a moment. Music, in particular, occupies a privileged place in his philosophy. He saw it as the art closest to the essence of the will, because it does not represent the world. It expresses it directly. When we listen to a symphony, we are not thinking about achievements, goals, or needs. We are simply there, surrendered, almost forgetting ourselves. It is in this forgetfulness that pain ceases for a moment. The second refuge is compassion. In a universe where each being is driven by the same will, recognizing the suffering of others is recognizing our own reflection. For Schopenhauer, ethics does not arise from reason or imposed rules, but from the direct feeling of empathy. When we feel compassion, we break with the selfishness of will. We stop seeing ourselves as centers of interest and begin to act based on something greater. This thought is powerful. It invites us to look beyond our own struggles and realize that everyone is dealing, to a greater or lesser degree, with the same anguish of existence. In this sense, kindness is not a social virtue. It is a form of metaphysical resistance. By relieving the pain of others, we are symbolically breaking the cycle of suffering. The third and deepest path is contemplation. Here, Schopenhauer draws on Eastern traditions. Contemplation is the state of mind in which we do not seek, do not desire, but simply observe. It can be brought about by nature, by silence, by meditation. It is a form of existence that moves away from the will, not through pleasure, but through stillness. To contemplate is to exist without demanding. It is to look at a landscape without wanting to possess it. It is to breathe without the urgency to solve everything. In this state, the will weakens. For a brief moment, we are not desire, we are consciousness. And this change of position can profoundly alter the way we face everyday life. It is important to emphasize that these paths are not definitive solutions. They do not eliminate the will, nor do they promise complete happiness. Schopenhauer himself was skeptical about the possibility of total overcoming, but he still recognized that these intervals of relief are precious. They are like cracks of light in a dark room. They do not illuminate everything, but they show that there is something beyond the constant pain. Perhaps this is the greatest lesson of these three paths, learning to value moments of suspension, of decompression, of presence, moments in which life, even without ultimate meaning, becomes bearable and sometimes even beautiful. And you, where do you find these pauses? Is there something that allows you to forget yourself for a few moments? Does art touch you? Does compassion move you? Does contemplation calm you? Share in the comments, because what relieves you may inspire someone who is still stuck in the current of desire. In the next chapter, we will explore how this philosophical pessimism, far from being a burden, can become a powerful source of inner strength. A new way of facing reality, with your feet on the ground and a lighter mind. Pessimism as an inner strength, a new way of living. At this point, it is no longer possible to see Schopenhauer's pessimism as a simple lament about life. He is not telling us that everything is bad, that nothing is worth it, or that the only way out is to give up. What he is actually doing is proposing a new way of being in the world, one that begins with the radical acceptance of what most people try to deny. Life is difficult, unstable, and often frustrating, but this acceptance has a curious effect. By abandoning the illusion that life should be anything other than it is, we gain a kind of inner armor, not one that hardens us or alienates us from the world, but one that allows us to face it with more sobriety. We stop expecting everything to turn out right all the time, and when we stop expecting that, we begin to deal with life's events with more serenity. Schopenhauer invites us to a form of strength that is not based on control or conquest, but on lucidity. It is a strength that arises from the awareness of impermanence, from the understanding that suffering is not an individual failure, but part of the fabric of existence. This not only lifts the burden of guilt, but also dissolves much of the anxiety that comes from constantly trying to avoid pain. This change in mindset has practical effects. In relationships, for example, we stop expecting others to complete us or save us. We start to see relationships as exchanges between equally flawed and limited beings, and this can make relationships more honest and less demanding. At work, we stop seeing success as an ultimate goal and start to value the process more, even when it is difficult. This new way of living does not promise great joy, but it offers something more subtle, a calm, almost silent joy, a contentment that does not depend on great achievements, but on the simple fact of being at peace with what is. This serenity, for Schopenhauer, is worth more than any passing enthusiasm. It's like walking in a light drizzle. Instead of running and hiding, we accept getting a little wet. And in this surrender, we realize that it is possible to keep walking, and that the drizzle doesn't kill, it just refreshes. Life, with all its inconveniences, goes on, but now we don't fight against it. We walk with it. This kind of realistic pessimism, far from being paralyzing, can become a basis for conscious action. We no longer act on blind impulse, trying to fill a void. We act with clarity, knowing that emptiness is part of the landscape, and that it does not prevent us from living meaningfully, even without guarantees. This philosophy also resonates with contemporary practices such as Stoicism, minimalism, and mindfulness. All of these in some way reject the compulsive pursuit of pleasure and invite presence, acceptance, and focus on what is within our control. Schopenhauer did not use these terms, but his proposal is similar: finding freedom in limitation, meaning in the finite and calm in the imperfect. It's curious how a philosophy that starts from suffering can end up generating more peace than many promises of happiness. This is because it doesn't try to deceive us, nor hide what is uncomfortable. On the contrary, it reveals, and it is in the revelation that transformation begins. Adopting this vision does not mean giving up on life or stopping dreaming. It simply means stopping dreaming about a world that does not exist and learning to value the world we have, with all that is unstable, imperfect, and real about it. A lighter life is not one without pain, but one in which pain does not surprise us, does not knock us down, does not define us. In the next chapter, we'll bring these ideas even closer to our own time. How can Schopenhauer's philosophy help us deal with modern suffering, the kind that comes from constant comparison, digital loneliness, and the endless search for satisfaction? We'll discover how old remedies can surprisingly treat today's pains, modern pains, ancient remedies. We live in an era that, at first glance, seems very far removed from Schopenhauer's world. Technology has advanced, comfort has increased, and we have access to information and entertainment like never before. But despite all these resources, human suffering has not disappeared. It has simply changed form. Today, we suffer not so much from material scarcity, but from a type of emptiness that is harder to identify. We suffer from the constant pressure to be successful, productive, and admired, from the incessant comparisons that social media feeds, from the anxiety that we are not enjoying life as we should. The promise of immediate happiness, so present in advertising, apps, and even motivational speeches, has become a new type of prison. And this is where Schopenhauer's thinking shows its power. What he described as the tyranny of the will is more alive than ever, only now masked by algorithms and likes. The endless search for validation and novelty has become the default way of living. But the result, in many cases, is a silent weariness, a feeling of always chasing something that never arrives. Schopenhauer's proposal, in this context, is almost revolutionary. Stop. Stop chasing after what is unsustainable. Stop comparing yourself. Stop waiting for life to offer a ready-made meaning, and instead, cultivate what he called the suspension of the will, through art, contemplation, compassion. These ancient remedies work today precisely because they do not depend on the external world. They do not require approval, performance, or results. Attending a concert, walking in silence, caring for someone, observing a tree, all of these have the power to interrupt for a moment the chaotic flow of will. And in these moments, life does not have to be grandiose, it just needs to be lived with presence. This philosophy does not deny achievement or joy, but puts it into perspective. It reminds us that behind every rush for pleasure lies a hidden anguish, and that perhaps the cure for that anguish lies not in more stimulation, but in less, not in more noise, but in silence, not in more desire, but in acceptance. This contrast between the modern world and Schopenhauer's teachings invites us to make a choice, to remain trapped in the cycle, or to seek, even if only gradually, a different way of existing. And this choice does not have to be radical. It can begin with small actions, with a moment of attention, with the decision to look at our own restlessness and ask, does this come from me or from what is expected of me? If this video is helping you see your own life through different eyes, leave a like here. It's a simple way to support this type of content and to say that deep reflections still have space amidst the noise. Now that we have brought Schopenhauer's thought to bear on our time, it is time to tie together everything we have seen so far. In the next and final chapter, we will conclude with a clear and, above all, human synthesis. How to find serenity precisely where no one expects it, in the acceptance of suffering. We have reached the end of a journey through the ideas of one of the most misunderstood and perhaps most sincere thinkers in the history of philosophy. What Schopenhauer offered us was not easy consolation nor artificial optimism. He offered us a mirror, a raw reflection of existence marked by desires that move and imprison us. And, at the same time, he pointed out cracks through which light still enters. For him, serenity is not about achieving all our dreams, nor escaping pain. It is about understanding that life, in its essence, was not made to please us. And precisely for this reason, all the peace we manage to build within it is a merit of our conscience, not a gift of chance. This is the understated beauty of Schopenhauerian pessimism. It does not promise paradise, but teaches us how to live in the desert with dignity. By accepting that life includes suffering, frustration, and limits, we make room for a real calm, not based on illusions, but on clarity. A calm that does not demand grand answers, just a lighter attitude toward what is. We may not have control over will, but we do have a choice about how we respond to it. And that choice, however subtle it may seem, changes everything. We can live as if we were fighting the sea, or as if we were learning to float. And by floating, we do not resist, but we do not sink either. If this video has kept you up to this point, and if it has somehow touched or resonated with you, consider subscribing to the channel. Here, we always seek to create spaces for pause and reflection amidst the noise of the world. After all, there may not be a single path to freedom, but there is a first step that everyone takes, opening your eyes to the truth, even when it hurts. And from there, learning to live with more lucidity, compassion, and who knows, a silent dose of peace.